Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. The morning sun spilled through the open curtains, dusting the kitchen with golden light as Mark brewed coffee, the rich aroma filling the house. He had planned a small surprise for his wife, Jenna, something simple yet thoughtful, a bouquet of her favorite flowers, peonies, with a playful note signed, "From your boy." The idea had struck him as the perfect way to inject a bit of whimsy into their routine, to remind her of the lighter, flirtatious early days of their relationship. Mark checked his watch impatiently, calculating the time it would take for the flowers to arrive. He imagined Jenna's smile, the sparkle in her eyes, and felt a surge of anticipation. He prided himself on being a considerate husband, always keen to keep the romance alive. The sound of a vehicle pulling up drew Mark to the window. He watched as a courier, holding a large, vibrant bouquet, approached their front door. The doorbell rang, and Mark retreated to the kitchen, wanting to witness Jenna's reaction without spoiling the surprise. From the kitchen, Mark listened as Jenna greeted the courier. A moment of silence followed, and then a soft exclamation. Curious, Mark peeked around the corner, expecting to see delight on Jenna's face. Instead, he saw confusion, her brow furrowed as she quickly scanned the accompanying note. "Who's it from?" Mark called out, trying to keep his tone light, though a thread of unease started to weave through him. "Just a friend," Jenna replied, her voice too casual, her smile forced. She tucked the note into her pocket, avoiding his gaze. "A friend?" Mark's heart thudded unevenly. "And what did this friend say to make you look so perplexed?" Jenna shrugged, a too quick, jerky motion. "Nothing important. Just an old joke between us." She turned away, busying herself with arranging the peonies in a vase, her actions hurried. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The playful mood he had fostered curdled into suspicion. Why would she hide a note from a friend? And since when did she keep secrets from him? Questions spiraled in his mind, each more unsettling than the last. Determined to understand, Mark waited for Jenna to leave for her yoga class before he retrieved the discarded note from the trash. The words were simple, innocent if one didn't know better, "From your boy, with all my love." The phrase echoed ominously in Mark's mind as he pieced together the morning's events. Jenna had assumed the flowers were from someone else, a lover, perhaps. The thought was like acid in his veins, corrosive and burning. He felt betrayed, his trust shattered by the implications of her secrecy. Fueled by a tumult of hurt and anger, Mark made a decision. He would confront Jenna, demand the truth. If his suspicions were confirmed, he couldn't see a way past this betrayal. The foundation of their marriage, built on trust and mutual respect, seemed irrevocably cracked. As he prepared for the confrontation, Mark planned his next steps meticulously. If his worst fears were true, he would not let the betrayal go unanswered. Revenge, a concept he had never entertained in his life, now pulsed at the edges of his thoughts, dark and compelling. He would ensure Jenna regretted her deception deeply, even if it meant erasing all traces of her from his life. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and Mark knew that whatever happened next would change the course of their lives forever. The intrigue of his next moves, fueled by the sting of betrayal, would unravel in the chapters to come. Mark's fingers drummed against the kitchen table, each tap echoing the rapid beat of his heart as he awaited Jenna's return. The house felt different now, charged with a tension that seemed to seep into its very walls. The once comforting silence now bore down on him, heavy with impending conflict. The sound of the door opening shattered the stillness. Jenna, still radiant from her yoga class, stepped in, her forehead creased slightly as she noticed Mark's stern expression. "Mark? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "We need to talk," Mark said flatly, his voice devoid of the warmth it usually held for her. He watched her face for any flicker of guilt, any sign that she knew what this was about. Jenna's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "Of course," she replied cautiously. What's on your mind? Mark took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists beneath the table. The flowers today, Jenna. They were from me. Confusion flashed across Jenna's face, quickly replaced by realization, then fear. Oh, she said, her voice faltering. I didn't know. I thought. You thought they were from someone else? Mark's voice was sharp, cutting through the air between them. Who, Jenna? Who did you think they were from? Jenna's face paled, her usual composure slipping. It's not what you think, Mark. Isn't it? Mark's tone was accusatory, his anger barely contained. You hid the note. You lied about who they were from. Tell me the truth, Jenna. Is there someone else? Jenna hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes. The single word struck Mark like a physical blow. His heart thudded painfully against his ribs as the reality of her admission sunk in. Who? The word was a growl, torn from the depths of his betrayal. It doesn't matter who, Jenna said quickly, her eyes darting away. It was a mistake. It meant nothing. Mistake. Mark's laugh was bitter, humorless. You call betraying our marriage a mistake? Jenna flinched, her face crumpling. I'm sorry, Mark. I never wanted to hurt you. Sorry doesn't change what you did, Mark snapped, rising from his chair. His whole body trembled with the force of his emotions. It's over, Jenna. I want you out of this house. Jenna stood too, her body rigid. Mark, please, let's talk about this. There's nothing left to discuss. Mark's voice boomed, echoing off the walls. You've made your choice. Now live with it. Tears streamed down Jenna's face, but Mark's heart was too hardened by betrayal to soften. Pack your things. I'll be in the office. When I come out, I don't want to see you here. Turning on his heel, Mark left the room, his steps heavy with the weight of his decision. Behind him, he heard the quiet rustle of Jenna moving, the soft thud of a suitcase being pulled from the closet. Each sound was a confirmation of the irrevocable rift between them. As he sat in his office, surrounded by the remnants of a life they had built together, Mark's mind raced. His initial shock was quickly giving way to a cold resolve. Jenna's deception would not go unanswered. Revenge, once a distant thought, now took shape in his mind, a plan forming from his newfound resolve to ensure that the price of her betrayal was as painful as the agony he now felt. The wheels were set in motion, and there would be no turning back. The afternoon sun had begun to wane, casting long shadows across the living room where Mark sat, alone and contemplative. The silence that had once been comforting now seemed to mock him with its stark contrast to the turmoil within. The house felt empty, hollowed out by Jenna's abrupt departure, each room echoing with the ghosts of their shared past. Mark's mind was a maelstrom of betrayal and hurt, each memory of Jenna now tainted with the sting of her deceit. But beneath the layers of pain, a cold, hard resolve had crystallized. Jenna would understand the full extent of the consequences she had set into motion. With grim determination, Mark picked up his phone and dialed a number he had hoped never to use under these circumstances. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Hello. Dan, it's Mark. I need your help. Mark's voice was steady, belying the chaos that raged within. Sure, what's going on? Dan's voice was laced with concern. It's Jenna. She's been unfaithful. I need to make sure she doesn't get away with it financially in the divorce. A heavy sigh came through the phone. I'm sorry to hear that, Mark. I'll do everything I can. We'll make sure the settlement reflects her actions. Thank you, Mark said, a bitter edge to his thanks. I want to start the proceedings immediately. I also need something else. What do you need? Evidence. Can you recommend a private investigator? I want proof of her infidelity. It might help in court. I know someone. He's discreet and thorough. I'll send you his contact details. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. After hanging up, Mark felt a surge of proactive energy. He wasn't just going to sit back and let Jenna's betrayal pass without consequence. She would learn that her actions had real, tangible repercussions. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark's phone buzzed with a text from Dan containing the private investigator's information. He wasted no time and dialed the number, arranging for a meeting the next morning. The following day, Mark met with the investigator, a sharp-eyed man named Rick, in a quiet coffee shop. Over cups of steaming coffee, Mark explained the situation, his voice cold and detached, focusing on the facts. I need proof of her affairs, photos, messages, whatever you can find. It's important that the evidence is concrete, Mark instructed, his hands wrapped tightly around his coffee cup as if to draw strength from its warmth. I understand, Rick nodded, his expression unreadable. I'll start right away. I'll keep you updated with everything I find. As Mark left the coffee shop, a plan slowly started to take shape in his mind. His next steps would ensure that Jenna felt the weight of her betrayal not just emotionally but practically as well. He would use the legal system to exact his retribution, armed with the evidence Rick would provide. This was not just about revenge, it was about justice, about making sure that betrayal came with a price. The intrigue of Mark's plan for retribution would unfold further, shaping the next chapters of his life. The endgame was clear in his mind, and he would pursue it relentlessly, fueled by a sense of righteous indignation and the cold fire of revenge. 2 weeks had passed since Jenna left the house. Mark had been patient, allowing time for the pieces of his plan to come together. His days were methodical, almost mechanical: wake up, go to work, meet with lawyers, and wait for Rick's updates. It was as though his life had shifted into a single-minded pursuit of revenge, and every action was calculated to achieve one outcome: making Jenna and her lover pay. Late one evening, as Mark sat in his office, his phone buzzed. It was Rick. I have what you need, Rick's voice was steady. It's worse than you thought. Send it to me, Mark replied, his voice cold and emotionless. A few seconds later, a series of images and documents appeared on Mark's phone. His breath caught in his throat as he scrolled through the photos. Jenna wasn't just having an affair, she was involved with someone Mark knew all too well. It was Tim, a mutual friend, someone who had been a part of their lives for years, someone who had shared their dinners, their celebrations, their stories. The images showed Jenna and Tim together in restaurants, hotels, and in Tim's apartment. Every image was a dagger in Mark's heart, each more painful than the last. He stared at the screen, his face contorting with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a violation of everything he thought he knew about the people closest to him. But this was exactly what he needed. The proof wasn't just for the courts now, it was for himself. There was no turning back from this. Mark had always been the rational, level-headed one, but that man was gone. What was left was a man consumed by the need for revenge, and nothing would stand in his way. The next morning, Mark put his plan into action. He called Jenna, his voice smooth and controlled, hiding the storm that churned inside him. Jenna, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the house tonight? There are some things we need to settle before the lawyers get involved, Mark said, knowing she wouldn't be able to resist the opportunity to negotiate before things turned ugly in court. Jenna hesitated. Is this about the divorce? Yes, Mark interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. It'll be quick. Just come by at 7. There was a pause. Okay. I'll be there. Mark hung up and smiled grimly. The stage was set. That evening, Mark waited in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows. On the coffee table in front of him lay a manila envelope, inside were all the photos, the evidence of her betrayal. He had made sure every piece was printed and organized. This wasn't just about showing her the truth, this was about breaking her. At exactly 7, the door opened, and Jenna walked in. She looked hesitant, as if sensing something was off, but Mark's calm demeanor seemed to reassure her. "Hey," she said softly, her eyes darting around the room. "What did you want to talk about?" Mark motioned for her to sit across from him. "I wanted to go over something before we move forward with the divorce." Jenna sat, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. "Okay." Mark slid the envelope across the table. "Open it." Her brow furrowed in confusion, but she complied, opening the flap and pulling out the stack of photos. Her face paled as she realized what they were. The images of her with Tim, their stolen moments captured in vivid detail, lay bare in front of her. Her hands trembled, and for a moment, she seemed frozen in place. "Mark, I can explain." "Explain what?" Mark's voice was cold, cutting her off. "That you've been sleeping with one of my closest friends. That you've been lying to me for months, maybe years." Jenna's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Tears welled in her eyes, but Mark felt nothing. Her tears were meaningless now. "You thought I wouldn't find out?" Mark continued, his voice rising. "You thought you could keep playing this game while I sat here like a fool?" "Mark, please," Jenna whispered, her voice cracking. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I never wanted to hurt you." "You didn't just hurt me," Mark spat, his anger finally spilling over. "You destroyed everything. Our life, our trust, everything we built. And for what? Tim." Jenna sobbed, but Mark wasn't done. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. You'll get nothing from the divorce. No money, no house. You're going to walk away with exactly what you deserve, nothing. Mark. And as for Tim." Mark's voice dropped dangerously low. "He'll regret this too." Jenna's eyes widened in fear. "What are you going to do?" "That's none of your concern anymore." Mark stood, looming over her. "Get out of my house. I never want to see your face again." Jenna, broken and defeated, stood on shaky legs. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She knew there was no saving this. She grabbed her bag and walked to the door, pausing for a moment as if wanting to say something. But she didn't. Instead, she left, the door closing softly behind her. Mark stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily, his heart pounding with the adrenaline of the moment. He had done it. He had destroyed her, just as she had destroyed him. But there was still one more thing to do. Later that night, Mark drove to Tim's apartment. His heart was steady now, his mind clear. This was the final act of retribution. When Tim opened the door, Mark didn't say a word. He simply handed him the same envelope he had given Jenna. Tim flipped through the photos, his face growing pale. "Mark, I..." Before he could finish, Mark's fist collided with his face, sending him sprawling to the floor. Tim groaned in pain, clutching his jaw, but Mark wasn't done. He grabbed Tim by the collar and hauled him up, slamming him against the wall. "You betrayed me," Mark growled, his voice filled with venom. "You're nothing to me now. You're going to lose everything." Tim didn't fight back. He knew better. Mark left him crumpled on the floor, knowing that the damage had been done. The betrayal had been avenged. Mark walked away from the apartment, the cool night air washing over him. He felt nothing now, no satisfaction, no closure. The people who had betrayed him were out of his life forever, but so was any semblance of the man he had been before. They were gone, and so was he.